morning, friends. We're on chapter 29. More prisoners arrive in the weeks that follow, and the gaps between meals become longer. The mortality rate grows exponentially. Even without gas chambers, Bergen-Belsen becomes a killing machine. Half a dozen bodies have to be removed from Dita's hut every day. The deaths are officially listed as due to natural causes. Whenever the guards arrive to pick the prisoners assigned to remove the dead, all the women freeze and hope it's not their day to win the lottery. Dita tries to blend in with the others, but today is her lucky day. The SS guard unmistakably points at her with the club. She is the last one selected, so when she reaches the corpse, the positions at the feet are already taken. She and a very dark woman who looks like a gypsy pick up the dead woman by her shoulders. Dita has seen many dead bodies over these years, but she has never touched one. She can't avoid brushing against the woman's hand, and its marble-like coldness makes her shiver. Dita and the gypsy woman support the bulk of the weight, but she worries about the dead woman's arms, how to keep them from swinging. One of the women carrying the feet of the corpse leads the way, and they come to an area that's fenced off with barbed wire. 2 guards armed with submachine guns accompany them. They reach a piece of waste ground where a German officer in shirt sleeves meets them and orders them to halt. They stop, still holding the dead woman, and the officer gives her a quick look. He jots something down in a notebook and signals for them to go on. One of the veterans whisper that it's Dr. Klein, and it's his job to control outbreaks of typhus. If the disease is detected in a hut, the Germans send the infected women to a quarantine camp to die. As the 4 women advance, the stench becomes more nauseating. There are several sinewy men working a few meters farther on. The dirty handkerchiefs they use to cover their noses make them look like bandits. Another group of women is standing in front of them, and in the process of depositing a corpse next to several others, one of the men signals to Dita's group that they should leave their body on the ground. The men throw the bodies into an enormous pit, as if they were sacks of potatoes. Dita leans over the edge for an instant, and what she sees makes her so queasy she has to grab hold of one of her companions. My God! It's a huge trench cramped with bodies. The ones on the bottom look singed, the ones on the top are piled up in a jumble, a tangle of arms, heads, and yellowish skin. Dita's stomach churns, but it's her most deeply held convictions that are stirred more than anything. That's all we are? Bits of decomposing matter, a few atoms like those of a willow tree or a shoe. Even the veteran, who has been here several times, is upset. No one speaks on the return journey. Seen like this, life appears to have no value. When Dita gets back, her mother gives her a look, asking how it went. Dita hides her face in her hand. She'd like to be left alone, but her mother hugs her and shares her pain. The chaos increases. Although there are no organized work groups anymore, they're given the order to stay close to the hut all day in case they are needed. Occasionally, one of the SS guards appears, her arms swinging energetically as she displays her healthy-looking, well-fed legs. She calls out some names in a shrill voice and tells them to go with her to work on the drainage ditches or in some shop. A couple of times, Dita is recruited for a workshop where they punch holes in belts and tabs for uniforms. The machines are very cold, and you have to use a lot of force to make the punchers strike the strips of leather with sufficient pressure. After roll call one morning, the supervisor appears in front of the assembled group. Volkenrath is easily recognizable because of the ostentatious bun of hair on top of her head, from which blonde strands are always escaping. She has the appearance of someone who's been to an expensive salon and then rolled around in a barn. Dita has heard that when she was a civilian, she was a hairdresser, which explains the hairstyle she sports amid the filth, lice, and typhus of Bergen-Belsen. Volkenrath is her usual angry self, which scares even her assistants. It occurs to Dita that if Hitler hadn't come to power and war hadn't broken out, this unscrupulous woman, now standing in front of them with a killer's glint in her eye, would be yet another of those slightly plump, pleasant hairdressers who give the girls ringlets and cheerfully comment about the neighborhood gossip. Their clients, including German Jewish women, would lower their heads, and she would cut their hair with their scissors, and none of them would be the least bit worried about placing their necks in the hands of this oversized woman who is addicted to somewhat fanciful, upswept hairstyles. If anyone had insinuated that some years down the track Elizabeth Volkenrath might be a murderer, the entire community would have been outraged. Good old Beth! That woman wouldn't hurt a fly, they'd say indignantly, and they'd demand that the author of the calumny retract it immediately. And they might have been right, but things have turned out otherwise. Now, if any of the women who arrive at her establishment don't behave in the way she wants, the inoffensive girl from the hairdressing salon puts a rope around their neck and hangs them. Dita is absorbed in these thoughts when a sound penetrates her brain like the metal puncher piercing the leather in the workshop. Elizabeth Adler! The administrative mess is so bad that the Germans have gone back to calling the prisoners by their names, not their numbers. The voice of the SS supervisor, authoritarian, strong, aggressive, military-sounding, impatient, rings out again, calling, Elizabeth Adler! Her mother had been distracted. Now she makes a move to step out of the line, but Dita is much faster and decisively steps forward. Adler, here! Adler, here! Liesel's eyes open wide, and she's so taken aback by her daughter's audacity that for a few seconds she doesn't know what to do. Just as she decides to step forward and sort out the mix-up with the guards, there's a shout of, Break ranks! The sea of women energetically surging around her blocks Liesel's path, and by the time the knot of people has untangled itself, her daughter has disappeared inside the hut to transfer that day's corpses. Liesel stands stock still, getting in the way of her companions, who are in a pointless hurry, as if they'd forgotten they have nowhere to go. Dita emerges a short while later, carrying a body with 3 other inmates. Her mother, still rooted at the same spot, and now on her own in the middle of the avenue of mud, angrily watches her daughter heading off. Another trip to mankind's final frontier. Dita again leans over the edge of the pit and comes back pale with queasiness. They all say it's the stench that makes them ill, but what really upsets them is the sight of those lives thrown down in a dump site. Dita hopes she never gets used to it. When she gets back to the hut, her mother is still standing near the door, as if she hadn't broken ranks after the roll call. Her expression is one of deep anger, even rage. Are you stupid? Have you forgotten that assuming the identity of another prisoner is punished by death? Liesel shouts at her. Dita can't remember the last time her mother shouted at her. An inmate walking by turns to stare, and Dita feels herself blushing. It seems unfair, and she feels tears flooding her eyes, even though she doesn't want to cry. Only her pride prevents them from spilling out. She nods and turns around. She can't stand it when her mother treats her like a child. It's not right. Dita did it because she knows her mother is weak and doesn't have the strength to carry a corpse. But Dita hasn't been given a chance to explain. She thinks her mother should be proud of her, but instead, she's earned the worst reprimand since the slap Liesel gave her in Prague. She doesn't value anything I do. She feels misunderstood. She may be in a concentration camp, but she's no different from the millions of other teenagers the world over who are about to turn 16. Dita is mistaken, however. Liesel is immensely proud of her daughter. She's not going to tell her so. She's been tortured with doubts about the sort of person her daughter would become growing up under military repression, with inadequate schooling in places infected by hatred and violence. Her daughter's generous act confirms all her intuitions and hopes. She knows that if Dita survives, she'll be a fine woman. But she can't say all this to Dita. If she showed satisfaction at such reckless behavior, it would encourage Dita and spur her on to put her life in danger again and again to save her mother from punishment. In any event, as a mother, she wants to avoid such things for her daughter, because life isn't either better or worse for Liesel anymore. Life has become unimportant to her. Her only happiness is the one that she sees in her daughter's eyes. Her daughter is still too young to understand all this. The next day, a guard, whom Dita has christened Crowface, turns up at the hut and orders them all to line up outside. Everybody out, and I mean everybody. I'll finish off anyone who doesn't get up with a bullet. Grumbling, taking their time, the women start to mobilize. Take your blankets. The women exchange looks, but the mystery is soon revealed. The Germans are moving them to the main women's camp to make room for a new contingent that has just arrived. Inside the main camp, the inmates are just as emaciated and water is very scarce, so it's only used for rationed drinking water. Nothing can be washed. The chaos has reached such heights that some prisoners don't even wear their striped uniforms, while others put a vest or another piece of clothing over their prison tops. Grime blackens the women's skin to the point it's hard to know if they are wearing strips of clothing or strips of blackened peeling flesh. An SS guard is supervising a group of women, gritting their teeth as they work in a drainage ditch. It's hard to distinguish between their arms and the handles of the hose. The hut is crammed, but has the small advantage of containing bunks like the ones in Auschwitz, which means they have dirty straw mattresses. They're packed with bed bugs, but at least they stop their bones from digging into themselves. A lot of women are lying down. Most of them are ill and have stopped getting up. Others pretend they are ill so they'll be left alone. The guards don't approach them because they're terrified of catching typhus. Dita and her mother sit down in an empty bunk they'll be sharing. Her mother is very tired, but Dita feels restless and gets up to explore the camp. There's not really much to see, huts and fences. There are groups of women still able to chat animatedly, the ones from the most recent transports, who still have some energy stored in their bodies. But there are others who don't have the strength even to talk. You look at them, and they don't look back. They've given in. When she notices a girl along the side of one of the huts, she's wearing a striped dress of a prisoner and a white kerchief on her head. Astonishingly white in the middle of this gigantic dunghill. Dita looks at her and then shuts her eyes because she thinks she's mistaken in what she's seeing. But when she opens them again, it's not a mirage. She's right there. Margit! Her friend suddenly raises her head and starts to stand up, but finds herself bowled over by Dita, who throws herself on top of Margit, and the two of them fall over and roll around, laughing on the ground. They grab hold of each other by the arms and stare at one another. If happiness is possible in these sorts of circumstances, then at this very moment they are happy. They hold hands and go off to see Dita's mother. As soon as she sees Liesel, Margit approaches her and, although she's never done it before, hugs her. In fact, she clings to her shoulders. She's needed a safe haven where she can cry for a long time. After she's eased some of her pain, Margit tells them that the selection in the family camp was awful. Her mother and sister were both assigned to the group that had been condemned. With the precision of someone who has relived the same scene many times over in her mind, she explains how they were sent to the ranks of the feeble. I could see them the whole time they were inside the hut until they finished the selection. They were very calm and holding hands. And the smaller group of fit women, which I was a part of, was ordered to leave. I didn't want to go, but a tide of women was pushing me toward the door. I could see Helga and my mother on the other side of the hut's chimney, getting smaller and surrounded by old women and children. They were watching me go. Do you know what, Tetinka? As they were watching me leave, they were smiling. Can you believe it? They were doomed to die, and they were smiling. Margit remembers that moment, which has been burned into her memory, and she shakes her head as if she can't believe it. Did they know that being in that group of old people, sick people, and children was almost certainly a death sentence? Maybe they did, and they were just happy for me, because I was part of the group of those who might be able to save themselves. Dita shrugs, and Liesel strokes Margit's head. They picture Margit's mother and sister at that moment, when they are already on the other side, when the fight for survival is over and there's no longer any fear. They were smiling, whispers Margit. They ask about her father. She hasn't seen him since that same morning in B2B. I'm almost glad I don't know what has become of him. Maybe he died, maybe he didn't. Either way, the uncertainty keeps her company. Margit may already be 16, but Mrs. Adler orders her to transfer her blanket to their hut. There is so little control that nobody will notice, and the three of them will sleep together on the bunk. You'll be uncomfortable, Margit replies, but we'll be together. And Liesel's answer brooks no response. Liesel Adler takes charge of Margit as if she were her second daughter, and for Dita, Margit is that big sister she's always wanted. As they are both dark-haired and have a sweet smile and gap teeth, many people in the family camp were convinced that they were sisters anyway, and the misunderstanding pleased them both. The two girls examine each other. They are thinner and somewhat the worse for wear, but neither one says so to the other. They cheer each other on. They talk, although there's not much to tell. Chaos and hunger, total indifference, infections and sickness, nothing new. A few rows from their bunk, two actual sisters ill with typhus are already losing the game of life. The younger sister Anne is shaking with fever in her bunk. The elder Margot is even worse. She's lying immobile on the lower bunk, connected to the world by a wisp of breath that is fading. If Dita had gone over to look at the girl who is still alive, she would have discovered that they are very similar. Teenagers with a sweet smile, dark hair, and the eyes of dreamers. Like Dita, Anne was an energetic and talkative girl, a bit of a rebel and with an imagination. She was also a girl who, apart from her unruly and self-assured appearance, had a reflexive and melancholy inner voice, but that was her secret. The two sisters had arrived in Bergen-Belsen in October 1944, after they had been deported from Amsterdam to Auschwitz. Their crime, being Jewish. 5 months have been too many to avoid death in this wet hole. Typhus is no respect for youth. Anne dies alone in her bunk the day after her sister. Her remains still stay buried forever in Bergen-Belson's mass graves. But Anne has done something that will end up being a small miracle. Her memory and her sister's memory will bring them back to life many years later. In the secret place in Amsterdam where the two girls and their family hid, she spent 2 years writing notes about her life in the house at the back. Some rooms attached to her father's office, which were closed off and converted into a hiding place. For 2 years, with the help of family friends who supplied provisions, the family lived there, together with the Van Pels family and Fritz Pfeffer. Shortly after they moved into their hideout, they celebrated Anne's birthday, and among the presents was a small notebook. Since she couldn't have a close friend in the hideout with whom she could share her feelings, she shared them with that notebook, which she christened Kitty. It didn't occur to her to give a title to this outline of her life in the house at the back, but posterity took care of that. It has become part of history as the diary of a young girl. Have a good day, friends.